It didn't begin as a scandal. It began as a pause. A pause long enough for someone to look twice at a date, to feel that uncomfortable itch when a timeline doesn't quite settle. Tom Bauer wasn't chasing gossip when he stumbled into this. He wasn't digging for chaos. He was following paper, ink, testimony. And what he uncovered wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic at first glance. It was quiet, almost polite. But quiet doesn't mean harmless. Sometimes quiet is where the truth hides best. What Bauer found didn't scream contradiction. It whispered it. A father's memory that didn't line up. A printed magazine line that refused to behave. Dates that slid instead of locking into place. And once those pieces were laid side by side, the story the world thought it knew about Meghan Markle began to feel less like a biography and more like a carefully edited press release. Thomas Markle never sounded angry when he spoke. That's what made it unsettling. He didn't rant. He didn't lash out. He spoke slowly, deliberately, like a man who knew his words mattered. He talked about school years, theater performances, early ambitions. He talked about when his daughter grew serious about acting. And every time he placed an age next to a memory, something went wrong. The numbers refused to cooperate. According to the public timeline, certain milestones should have happened later. But according to the man who watched them unfold, they happened earlier or later, just not where the palace version placed them. And then came the moment that shifted everything. Quietly, without drama, Thomas suggested something that should have stopped the conversation cold. That Meghan's official birth year might not be accurate. Coming from anyone else, that line could be dismissed. Coming from the man who held her as a newborn, who dated photographs, who marked birthdays, it landed differently. It didn't feel like gossip. It felt like a correction. That was the first crack. The one you might ignore if you didn't know what to do with it yet. Then the second crack appeared. Printed, permanent, unchangeable. March 1997. A teen magazine most people flip through without a second thought. Page 90. Among dozens of hopeful faces chasing early fame, one line sat there calmly, waiting. Meghan Markle, age 21. No footnote, no correction, no future agenda. Just ink on paper distributed nationwide years before royalty ever entered the picture. And the math exploded. If Meghan was born in 1981, as officially stated, she would have been 15 in 1997. Not 21. Not even close. 6 years don't disappear by accident. This wasn't a rounding error. This wasn't a typo. It was a number printed long before fame, long before image control, long before anyone had reason to manipulate a narrative. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. If the magazine was right, then everything else shifts. School timelines, early career decisions, roles she was supposedly too young for suddenly make sense. And the woman who stepped into royal life wasn't a mid-30s newcomer. She was a woman well into her 40s. That changes perception. That changes media framing. That changes how the palace would have wanted the story told. Two timelines now existed side by side. One neat and official, one implied and inconvenient. And once age becomes uncertain, nothing built on it feels solid anymore. That uncertainty didn't stop at biography. It followed her straight into motherhood. When Prince Harry described Archie's birth, the story sounded gentle, almost cinematic. Dim lighting, calm surroundings, 2 epidurals, a serene delivery. Home within 2 hours. It was presented like a wellness retreat with a baby at the end. But people familiar with Portland Hospital didn't hear poetry. They heard impossibility. Epidurals aren't handed out like aspirin, they're continuous. You don't get 2. That alone raised eyebrows. Then came the timing. High-risk pregnancies, which apply regardless of which age timeline you accept, don't walk out the door that quickly. Monitoring is mandatory. Observation is non-negotiable. 2 hours from birth to home doesn't happen. Not medically, not safely. And then there was the drive. Nearly an hour just to reach Frogmore Cottage. That leaves barely any time for delivery, recovery, evaluation, discharge, and transport preparation. Doctors don't debate this. It simply doesn't work. The spa-like birth setting described? Also impossible. High-risk supervision strips away ambiance. No tubs, no candles, no aesthetic choices. Safety overrides comfort every time. None of this came from rumor mills. It came from protocol, from people who work inside these systems. And once again, the story didn't explode. It bent. It softened. It felt edited. Just like the age. Just like the timeline. And when contradictions stack quietly instead of screaming, institutions respond with silence. No clarifications. No adjustments. amendments, just commitment to the original version, because correcting one detail invites questions about all the others. This isn't unusual. Image management thrives on consistency, not truth, and as long as no one tilts the page, pencil marks stay hidden. But Bauer tilted it. What emerged wasn't a villain or a villainous plot. It was something more human and more unsettling. A story shaped to survive, a narrative softened to fit expectation, a biography smoothed until it gleamed. Maybe the age adjustment wasn't meant to deceive. Maybe it was meant to protect. Hollywood punishes women for aging. Royal optics favor fairy tales. A few years shaved off here, a story polished there, and suddenly the version the world sees feels easier to sell. But pencil leaves pressure. And when light shifts, pressure shows. The magazine age, the father's memories, the medical timeline that refuses to cooperate. Each detail alone can be explained away. Together, they don't disappear, they accumulate. And accumulation changes everything. There are always two versions of a public life, the one written in ink and the one written in pencil. Ink is official, pencil is flexible. But when those two no longer match, the truth doesn't vanish. It waits. And now the page has been tilted. The erased lines are visible. Not enough to answer every question. Not enough to close the book. Just enough to make it impossible to return to the simple version we were handed without hesitation. This story doesn't end with certainty. It ends with awareness. Awareness that the narrative may have been curated, that timelines may have been adjusted, that the woman the world met might not be the woman the records describe. And once that realization settles in, one thing becomes impossible: unseeing the cracks. The unsettling part isn't that questions exist. Questions always exist around powerful people. The unsettling part is how neatly everything tries to stay still once those questions surface. No outrage, no corrections, just a careful freeze, like if nothing moves, nothing will break. But silence doesn't erase pressure. It multiplies it. What makes this story cling to the mind is how ordinary the clues are. There's no leaked phone call, no explosive confession, just dates, math, procedures, memories. The kind of things that are supposed to be boring. The kind of things no one thinks to manipulate because they seem too small to matter. And yet, those are the very details that refuse to cooperate. Think about the age issue alone. If a woman's public age shifts by 6 years, that's not cosmetic. That redefines her professional arc. It changes how success is framed. It alters whether she's seen as a late bloomer, a prodigy, or a strategic climber. Hollywood treats those categories very differently. So does the public. So does a monarchy obsessed with optics and narrative purity. What's striking is how consistent the pattern is. Smooth edges, gentle language, emotional warmth layered over logistical gaps. The story always feels complete until you try to walk through it. Then suddenly doors don't open where they should. Time compresses, procedures blur, and instead of clarity, you're left with something polished but hollow. This is where public image becomes almost theatrical. Because once a version of events is released, correcting it becomes dangerous. A single correction suggests vulnerability, and vulnerability invites inspection. So the safest path becomes repetition. Say it again. Say it the same way. Say it until it feels true enough to stop questioning. But facts don't tire. They don't get bored. They wait. The reason this continues to resonate isn't because it accuses, but because it destabilizes. It suggests that the story we've been consuming may not be false, but incomplete, curated, simplified, adjusted to fit a role rather than reflect a life. And when a person steps into a global institution like royalty, that adjustment becomes tempting, maybe even expected. There's also the uncomfortable reality that women, especially women in public life, are taught early that age is a liability. Careers are shortened by it. Desirability is measured against it. So the idea that someone might quietly bend a timeline to survive a brutal system doesn't feel impossible. It feels plausible, almost predictable. But plausibility doesn't equal transparency. And transparency is where the story fractures. Because once a public figure asks the world to accept one version of events as absolute truth, inconsistencies stop being harmless. They become questions of trust. What's left now isn't a verdict. It's a shadow that follows every official biography, every carefully worded statement, every polished anecdote. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply exists, reminding anyone paying attention that stories, no matter how elegant, can be assembled. And once you understand that, you start noticing how often assembly replaces authenticity. This doesn't mean every detail was engineered with malice. It means the image may have been prioritized over the mess. And real lives are messy. They don't fit into neat timelines. They resist symmetry. When someone's story feels too clean, too perfectly paced, it invites scrutiny rather than admiration. The truth, whatever it is, may never be fully confirmed. Records can be sealed. Statements can remain unchanged. Time itself can blur evidence. But doubt doesn't need proof to survive. It only needs inconsistency. And that's where this story now lives, in this space between what was said and what was recorded, between what was remembered and what was printed, between what medicine allows and what was described. Once that space opens, it doesn't close again. The page has already been tilted. The light has already shifted. And even if no more answers come, one thing is certain. The narrative will never feel as simple as it once did, because simplicity relies on trust. And trust, once questioned, never returns unchanged. Never returns unchanged. Never returns unchanged.